In the heart of a bustling city filled with ambition, polished shoes, and cold glances, there sat a woman who once had dreams and dignity, but now only had silence and stares. Zainab, 5 months pregnant, sat outside a grocery store, her back against the cement wall, her hands trembling as she held a plastic cup not for coffee but for coins. Strangers passed by without looking. Some quickened their steps as if poverty might be contagious. Others paused just long enough to drop change without eye contact. But Zainab wasn't always this way. She once had a husband, a home, a life full of promise. Her husband Kola was no prince, but he was kind, a trader with big dreams and a bigger heart. They lived simply but joyfully until he collapsed one evening without warning. Doctors said it was his heart, and within days he was gone. And so was Zainab's world. Instead of comfort, she was met with cruelty. Kola's family demanded she leave their house, accusing her of bad luck, of bringing misfortune, of being a burden, and like that Zainab found herself homeless with nothing but a bulging belly and shattered hope. And this happens more often than we like to admit. Across many societies, widows are frequently ostracized, treated as liabilities, not grieving humans in need of care. The World Bank reports that millions of women in developing countries lose homes rights and protection when their husbands die, and the law rarely sides with them. It was into this harsh reality that Zainab stumbled, not into shelter, but into survival. She tried cleaning jobs, begged for old clothes, and eventually sat outside the supermarket, hoping for kindness. And then something shifted. Idris, a millionaire entrepreneur with a reputation as fierce as his fashion sense, happened to walk past her. He was the kind of man who made headlines, and headlines didn't usually involve pregnant beggars. He walked with purpose, earbuds and phone pressed to his ear, when a voice from the ground said, "Please, just water, not money, just water." He paused, looked down, and saw Zainab, not disheveled but dignified, not angry but empty. Something about her expression tugged at a place in his heart he had long boarded up, and he did something strange. He sat beside her, asked her name, and for a moment the world watched a rich man and a homeless woman share silence that felt like a conversation. He came back the next day and the day after, bringing warm food, water, and blankets. But more than that, he brought conversation. He asked about her life, listened to her story, and what began as charity turned into curiosity and then into something else, something unspoken and real. On the fifth visit, Idris did something no one expected, not even himself. He offered her a proposal. Not romantic, not yet. He said, "I have twin daughters who need a caretaker, and I can give you shelter and care for you and your child in return. Help raise them. Let's make it official on paper, a temporary arrangement." Zainab stared at him, suspicious and scared. Was this a trap, a transaction, or a test? But Idris wasn't offering pity. He was offering partnership, a fragile hope. She hesitated, asked for time, and spent the night debating her, worth her fears, her unborn child's safety, and finally said yes, not because she trusted him completely, but because saying no meant returning to nothing. And so their strange journey began. And what makes this story so gripping is not just the contrast between wealth and poverty, but the collision of two broken people pretending to be whole. Zainab entered his mansion not as a guest, but as an agreement, and met his daughters Tara and Tanya, wild, clever, and chaotic 6-year-old twins who had driven away every nanny with tantrums and glitter. Zainab didn't shrink. She smiled, knelt to their level, and said, "Let's make this work." And from that day, everything changed, not all at once, not like a movie, but slowly. Through spilled cereal, morning chaos, and shared bedtime stories, the walls began to melt. Zainab entered Idris's life like a question that refused to be ignored, in a house where marble floors echoed loneliness and designer furniture looked barely used. She brought warmth not because she tried to, but because it followed her. Idris had not anticipated the effect she would have, not just on the children, but on the atmosphere itself. The house, which once felt like a showpiece, began to feel like a home. The twins Tara and Tanya had been labeled difficult, spoiled, even unreachable. But Zainab didn't treat them as problems to fix. She treated them like people to understand. She didn't raise her voice or bribe them. She engaged with them, created silly songs for brushing teeth, turned meals into stories, and allowed tantrums without judgment. This approach mirrors real-life therapeutic parenting, especially effective for children who act out due to emotional trauma. And surprisingly, it worked within weeks. The twins began to soften toward her. Tara let her braid her hair. Tanya started asking for bedtime hugs. They even started calling her Z, which quickly evolved into Zaza, a nickname born from affection, not obligation, and Idris watched it unfold from the sidelines, first impressed, then intrigued, and finally moved by how effortlessly Zainab created stability. Where he had only managed control, he began noticing things, the way she folded laundry, while humming, the way she placed her hand gently on his daughter's back. When they had nightmares, the way she carried her belly with pride despite her past. He began to feel something unexpected. Jealousy, not of her attention toward the girls, but of anyone else who might see the grace she carried. Strangers at the grocery store smiled at her. Two long cab drivers offered her rides without asking. Idris began offering to drive her himself on errands and lingering longer in conversations that had nothing to do with the twins. One evening after dinner, when the twins were asleep, Zainab sat on the porch watching the moon, and Idris joined her without speaking. They sat in silence until he said, "I never expected this." She replied, "Neither did I." And there it was, an acknowledgement that their arrangement had evolved into something with no clear label, only shared glances and growing ease. Zainab began to open up about her past, the grief, the betrayal, the nights she cried in silence. Idris listened, not as a savior, but as someone who knew pain too. He spoke of losing his parents early, of raising his sisters, of being called too cold, too focused, too unreachable. They saw in each other a mirror of resilience shaped by fire, not comfort, and the more they shared, the more the walls crumbled between them. And this kind of emotional intimacy is what builds real love. Not flowers or flattery, but understanding. Idris began spending more time at home, canceling meetings, opting for school pickups, even learning to cook, though he failed miserably. Zainab teased him mercilessly, and they laughed together in a way that made even the staff pause and smile. One day the twins insisted Zainab attend their school event, not as their nanny but as their family. And when one teacher asked, "Are you their aunt?" the girls interrupted and said, "She's our Zaza. She's like our mom." Idris felt something twist inside him, pride, affection, and a rising clarity that he was falling in love, not just with Zainab's kindness, but with her strength, her humor, her refusal to break. Even when life had tried to crush her, she had entered his world as a beggar, but now she was the center of his universe. Not because he rescued her, but because she taught him how to live fully again. He began questioning what would happen when their arrangement expired. The paper marriage had a time limit, but his feelings didn't. And one evening, as they watched the girls draw in the living room, Zainab looked at him and said, "This feels like a dream." And he replied, "Then let's not wake up." And in that moment, something unspoken turned permanent. As the days turned into weeks, the temporary lines they had drawn began to blur. Routines once built from necessity became rituals of affection. Idris started waking earlier, not for work calls, but for breakfast with Zainab and the twins. He learned how she liked her tea with a tiny splash of milk and a touch of honey, and she began placing his favorite newspaper beside his mug. Without asking the staff, the twins thrived. Their tantrums became jokes, their defiance turned to creativity, and soon their school performance improved. Their teachers even asked what had changed at home. And the answer was simple: they felt safe and loved. And this transformation is a reminder that children are not inherently difficult. They're often just misunderstood and in need of emotional security. Zainab created that space not through perfection, but through presence. Idris began realizing that he had built his wealth on solving external problems, yet had neglected his internal ones. He had thought success was about control, but Zainab showed him that love was about surrender. One evening, Idris came home from work, tired and visibly tense. Zainab, who had just tucked in the girls, greeted him with soft eyes, and instead of asking about his day, she simply handed him a bowl of pepper soup and sat beside him in silence. "Not everything needs fixing," she said sometimes. "We just need to feel seen and heard." And that night he slept like a child for the first time in years. A few days later, while visiting a client's art exhibition, Idris caught Zainab's reflection in a gallery mirror and realized he was in love, not in a poetic or impulsive way, but in a grounded, undeniable, soul-knowing kind of way. The kind that doesn't announce itself with fireworks, but settles in like oxygen. He wanted to tell her, but hesitated, unsure if she saw him the same way, unsure if he was asking too much from someone who had already given more than expected. Instead, he began showing her how he felt, fixing the broken lock on her bedroom door, buying her favorite fruit without her asking, defending her when a rude relative questioned her presence at a family function. These small actions were his way of saying, I see you, I value you, I want you to stay. But love has a funny way of creeping into light. Zainab felt it too in the way she paused when he entered a room, the way her laughter lingered longer when he teased her, the way she began saving her best stories to tell him first one afternoon while baking cookies with the twins. Tanya asked, why aren't you and Daddy married for real? Zainab froze, but before she could answer, Idris walked in and said, that's a good question, don't you think? And they all laughed, but the question hung in the air like a balloon. No one was ready to pop. Later that night. Zainab couldn't sleep. She sat on the balcony wrapped in a blanket, watching the stars and wondering how she got here, from begging on concrete to dreaming under a roof. She didn't pay for with a man who wasn't hers, but felt like home in every way. She thought about her unborn child, Malik. The life she wanted to offer him, a life of dignity, love, and stability, not just survival. The next morning, she found a note on her pillow. It said, you've brought more life into this home than I ever thought possible, and I don't want this to end. Idris, she kept that note in her journal, tucked between pages that once held grief and now held hope. Real love doesn't always begin with I love you. It begins with I choose you, over and over again. And that's exactly what was happening here. Two people choosing each other in the quiet, in the chaos, in the everyday moments, when no one is watching. Life inside the mansion began to feel less like a script and more like a heartbeat. Every day had its rhythm: morning laughter over spilled cereal, arguments about school shoes that somehow resolved in tickle fights, movie nights with popcorn that never stayed in the bowl, and Malik kicking inside Zainab's growing belly, as if dancing to the soundtrack of a life she never imagined, but fully embraced. And yet, even in this growing warmth, a quiet fear hovered. Zainab had learned from life that good things could vanish in an instant. So she never let herself feel fully settled, and Idris, though emotionally awakened, was still hesitant, afraid that one wrong move might shatter what they had built on fragile foundations. Their paper marriage had no expiration date, but it also had no promise, and the longer they lingered in the undefined space between arrangement and relationship, the more tension built like air before a thunderstorm. Then came the charity gala, an annual event where Idris was expected to show face, shake hands, donate big, and look the part. Zainab accompanied him. For the first time, she wore a deep green dress that flowed like silk rivers over her curves, her baby bump soft and proud, her hair pulled back in a way that made her eyes glow. Idris couldn't stop looking at her, not because she was beautiful, but because she looked like everything he had been too blind to see. Until now, they walked into the ballroom, arm in arm. People stared, not in judgment, but in confusion and curiosity. Whispers floated through the air. That's not the usual plus one. Who is she? She pregnant? Is that Idris's child? Is he serious? Idris noticed but didn't flinch. In fact, he did something bold during his speech after the auction. He paused, looked at Zainab in the audience and said, when you think success is only about numbers and headlines, you miss out on the things that really matter, like compassion, love, and courage. Sometimes the person who changes your life is not the one you expected, but the one you needed, and I'm grateful to have found mine. That moment broke the air like glass. Zainab's eyes filled with tears, not from embarrassment, but from being seen, acknowledged, valued. Idris had just told the world she mattered, without asking her permission, without waiting for applause, just truth spoken plainly. The ride home was quiet, not tense, but sacred, like both were holding on to a moment too precious to break once inside. Idris said, I meant every word, and Zainab whispered, I know. They stood in the hallway, surrounded by silence and moonlight. And finally he said, Zainab, will you marry me, not on paper, not for convenience, but truly, fully, deeply, with no escape clause, no hidden agenda, just me, you, the kids, and our messy, perfect lives. She looked at him long and hard and then smiled with a nod that said yes. Before her lips even moved in that instant, all the moments of rejection, Betrayal and fear dissolved into purpose. Her story hadn't ended in the streets, it had only started there. And this truth resonates with real people every day across the world. There are women like Zainab who rise from abandonment to belonging, not because someone saves them, but because someone believes in them. Idris didn't rescue her, he respected her, and that made all the difference. A week later, the twins threw a surprise engagement party using confetti from their school art project and a cake that looked like it had survived a food fight. Zainab laughed until her sides ached, and Idris swore he'd never eat pink frosting again. They didn't need perfection. They needed presence, and they had that in abundance. The wedding was not extravagant. It was intimate and radiant with meaning. It took place in the backyard of the mansion, which now felt like a lived-in memory. Not a luxury museum, fairy lights strung from trees flickered above. Long tables filled with laughter. Not formality, the twins wore white dresses with glitter shoes and flower crowns, insisting they were the princesses of the day. Zainab wore a simple ivory gown, her baby bump prominently displayed, and instead of walking down the aisle alone, she entered the garden hand in hand with Tara. And Tanya Idris stood at the front, eyes wide, not with nerves, but with awe. Not just at her beauty, but at the reality that she had chosen him, back in front of family friends, and even skeptical guests who once whispered with doubt. They said their vows not memorized, not poetic, but from the heart. Idris promised to never make her feel small again, to choose her every day with his actions, and not just his intentions. Zainab promised to continue laughing through the chaos, to love all three children equally, and to never let him go to bed without a kiss. And in that garden surrounded by candles, joy and crumbs from stolen cupcakes, they became more than a couple. They became a living testimony to the power of second chances after the ceremony. The house buzzed with music and the smell of jollof rice mixed with vanilla cake. Zainab danced with the twins, Idris danced with his cousins, and at one point they all danced together, clumsily, hilariously, joyfully. The next chapter began in a hospital room weeks later when Zainab gave birth to Malik. He came out wailing, then smiling, or so Idris claimed. And the moment he held his son for the first time, he wept not from fear like he used to, but from fullness. His hands, once used to closing business deals, now cradled legacies. And this shift was deeper than fatherhood. It was transformation, real and irreversible. Zainab thrived in motherhood, the kind of thriving that isn't always glamorous, but is soul deep. She nursed, rocked, disciplined, laughed, prayed, and when she was tired, Idris didn't disappear. He showed up, learned how to swaddle, how to change diapers, how to bounce the baby just right while singing off-key lullabies in the hallway. And the twins became older sisters with pride, giving Malik silly nicknames and inventing bedtime stories, where he was always the hero over time. Their home became louder, messier, richer, with memories, birthdays filled with flower fights, vacations that ended in flat tires and deep belly laughter. And one rainy morning, Zainab found out she was pregnant again. Not with one child, but two more twins, lightning striking. Twice they both laughed, cried, and high-fived all at once. This time she wasn't afraid. This time she had everything she needed, and in this noisy miracle of a household filled with 6 lives bound by love, not perfection, they discovered that home is not built with bricks, but with choices. Idris, who once viewed relationships as distractions, now spoke at family seminars encouraging men to step up, to be soft without shame, present without prompting. Zainab began mentoring women, especially single mothers, speaking at churches, women's groups, and even on local radio about reclaiming dignity after devastation. Her voice, once silenced by circumstance, now echoed with strength. Their story touched many, because it wasn't just about wealth or romance. It was about rebuilding. It was about healing and believing that no matter where you start, you are not bound to stay there. They taught their children that love is not always convenient, but it is always worth choosing. That family is not only about who you are born to, but also about who walks with you when everyone else walks away. And that legacy is not measured by money, but by how deeply you make others feel safe, wanted, and seen. And so this story that began with a man in a suit and a woman on the sidewalk ended with a home bursting with laughter, shoes at every doorway, Baby toys on every surface and hearts, stitched together by courage, not convenience.